Then thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ayyar. So I'll start the meeting now. It's a great pleasure and privilege to have with us Dr. Savita Ayyar here today. She is currently working on behalf of the DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance as the lead of a lead for the India Research Management Initiative, IRMI. She is a founder of an independent consultancy service, Chakurendra Tree. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Uh, this
Yeah.
this service supports organizations with their research management needs. Dr. Ayyar received her initial training in biochemistry at the University of Delhi and biotechnology at AIIMS, New Delhi. She completed her doctoral work in developmental biology at the University of Cambridge, UK. After her postdoctoral research at the University of Cambridge, she moved to the Wellcome Trust in London, UK. She then came back to India and initiated and nurtured the activities of the Research Development Office at NCBS, Bangalore. Under her leadership, the operations at NCBS RDO grew to include international partnerships, grant management, philanthropic fundraising and endowment, management of intramural funding, and news and communications. She will be talking about the role of research management in enabling science and technology in India. With this very brief intro, I thank Dr. Ayyar again and pass the virtual mic to her to start her lecture. Over to you, Dr. Ayyar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suresh. Thank you very much, Professor Abhinandan. Such a pleasure to be here to interact with all the fellows from the STI Policy Program. So I'll just try to share my slides. And are my slides visible? Okay. All right. So I just wanted to start with a little story, actually. So this goes back a very long time to a Russian scientist called Mendeleev. And Mendeleev was trying to find some kind of order, in the elements and trying to organize them into a table. And the story goes that he actually fell asleep over his papers one night. And it all appeared to him in a dream. When he woke up, the structure of the periodic table appeared. And it turns out that there were also some gaps he predicted. And over time, those gaps were filled by actual elements that got discovered in due course. And I think this is the nature of science. At any given point of time, we have certain knowledge, we have certain facts available with us, and there are always gaps. And as scientists, we aim to fill those gaps. And of course, under the current times, there is an increasing realization that science can contribute very effectively to society. And consequently, there is also pressure for scientists to contribute to society. So on that note, on science, we can't have science without research funding. Research funding is a crucial element of the ecosystem to enable science. And we are very fortunate here in India that the government of India has been incredibly supportive of science and technology for a long period of time. There are, of course, debates about the proportion of the R&D expenditure with respect to the GDP. That figure has stayed at 0.7. And speculations about how this can be increased, how this compares with similar figures for other countries, the relative contributions of industry and the government, and so on. But the fact of the matter still is that India is very fortunate, and Indian scientists are very fortunate to have access to incredible resources, both from the government of India, from international funding sources, and from the industry sector as well. So very briefly, let's just go over some categories of investments that are needed for enabling science. There are investments needed for the institutions, the infrastructure, that could be facilities, highly specialized facilities, the buildings, the estates, the core salaries, That's quite a significant chunk. And there are many institutions in India which are supported either through the central government, the state government, other sources, including philanthropic sources. Another major chunk of research investments actually happens in research personnel. So this could include faculty members, graduate students, postdocs, the research assistants. There is a large body of personnel who actually make science what it is in India today. And again, these positions, these personnel are supported through various mechanisms, including co-funding, through grant-related positions, and so on. And then there is research funding, of course, the funding that is exclusively set aside for furthering good ideas, scientific ideas. And this is a subject we will go into a little bit more in depth. And finally, I've also put in a category over here, which is partnerships, funding for research outcomes, outreach. There are various mechanisms for scientists to connect with society, and there are important aspects which need to be supported. But let's go deeper into the aspect of research funding. So scientists in India have access to a huge range of funding schemes. These can include funding for personal support, for recognition, such as fellowships. There are research resources, which are the typical extramural funding, the project funding from our organizations, such as Department of Biotechnology, DST, and SERB. There's funding available for networking through several organizations. There's funding available for travel to conferences and also exchange visits. And these opportunities for networking are really important for our Indian scientists to feel connected with what's happening in the rest of the world. So this is extremely crucial funding support. And of course, there is also funding for collaborations in several different ways. What I'd like to say is that the vast majority of these funding instruments, the entire process is generally led by our PIs. So this is PI-led funding with a couple of exceptions. And to just look at this in a slightly different way, again, our scientists have access to funding from a range of funding agencies. There are government agencies, there are international funding agencies, philanthropies. And the point is that each of these funding agencies and the funding schemes that are available from the agencies have their own nuances. So there are specific policies and procedures, specific guidelines, terms and conditions. And so for our scientists to apply for funding and compete successfully for funding, they need to be aware of all of those nuances. And this is competitive funding. And this is definitely part and parcel of developing a scientist research program and scientific career. One excellent benefit of applying for competitive funding is that the applicant could get peer review, advice or comments from others who review the grant proposal, and this can help to finesse research ideas. And this kind of activity can also help our researchers learn the art and the science of successfully raising funds from different agencies. So that's as far as the agencies and the extramural funding goes. I'd like to talk a little bit about international partnerships. Again, there are a lot of opportunities for international partnerships, funded partnerships. There are benefits to such partnerships that include having a multidimensional approach where one PI might not have all of the expertise needed, but a collaborator could help to plug the gaps. This could be excellent for career development because it's an opportunity for working across with different colleagues and for that peer learning. There are specific funding opportunities for collaborations. There's enhanced visibility and the potential for publications from partnerships. But there are also some challenges. So as opposed to a single PI-led grant, which is all contained within one institution, a partnership by definition involves multiple stakeholders and therefore communication is key. There could be issues with team management, with data sharing, authorship, regulatory hurdles, the list goes on. But nevertheless, there are huge benefits of being in international partnerships. India is also now seeing what's called team science. And team science is really a collaborative effort to address the scientific challenge. And we are really facing some very large challenges. Those could be major health challenges like mental health or diabetes, for example, could relate to climate change. But these are typically the kinds of challenges which are difficult to tackle using just one particular approach and are best served by having a team of individuals with complementary expertise, often very different expertise. And there are huge benefits to team science, but nevertheless, team science does require significant planning, time, and effort to coordinate. So there are challenges as with all the other kinds of partnerships. And there's a statutory regulation of research. This is another point I'd like to come to, which is that it's now a statutory requirement for all research institutions worldwide to ensure the responsible and safe conduct of research. And this matter of ethics is different from the technical validity of the approaches. And this is particularly significant for life sciences research. And the ethical conduct of research programs is generally reviewed and monitored by specially appointed institutional review committees. And in addition, the institutions then have to further report back to the national regulatory bodies about the progress of this project. Now, it's important to make a distinction between what happens with a funded project, that is an ongoing conversation between the PI and the funding agency. In this case, it is between the PI and the ethical approval committees and the national regulatory bodies. But what's important to note is that the receipt of ethical approvals is a prerequisite for the conduct of externally funded research. So if a PI is undertaking a strand of research which requires all of these kinds of approvals, then there are two parallel pieces of work for the PI to take on. And these are just some of the standard statutory requirements in India, which relate to research, for example, using animals or stem cells or human samples. So in a nutshell, what is the life of a PI like? Definitely juggling priorities that might be between teaching, research, mentoring, and administration, finding that time for research amidst all of these responsibilities, and certainly ideating and securing funding for their research ideas and managing the project does take a lot of time and effort on the part of the PI. Career development is an important aspect. There are so many stages for a PI to develop their career. And there's also a parallel commitment towards the career development of the younger colleagues within the team. Building and managing partnerships, as we've seen, that can have huge benefits, but that does require enormous commitment from PIs towards those activities. And of course, there's regulatory compliance and the pressure to publish. So this can be quite challenging for PIs, and ideally they would like to focus on just research, but this is possibly the typical day in the life of a PI. And if we look at this from the institutional perspective, as far as the institution is concerned, if the PIs can tap into diverse funding streams, that enhances the pool, the collective resource base for the institution and the visibility. But working with these diverse funding systems requires the institution to understand the nuances of each of the systems and to ensure that there is full follow through from all of the participating administrative teams, such as finance, HR, procurement, and so on. Just imagine the situation that if it's an institution that has been generally used to dealing with just one funding agency. Now, suddenly, if they have 50 PIs who are applying to 50 different sources of funding, then certainly there is a requirement for the institution to have systems in place that can help the PIs manage it for their own pieces of work and at an institutional level ensure that the entire process is well managed. And that is the system we are referring to as research management, and that is really the subject of my talk today. So I just pulled out this section from the STIP 2020 policy, there's a section on ease of doing research. There are various very useful points of view expressed in this segment, which really is about the balance of time that a PI spends between their actual research activities and a host of administrative activities. So what can we do to offer a solution for these kind of activities? And in this particular segment, there is also a mention of international best practices in grant management, of digital technologies. So these are wonderful ideas, and I would like to say that effective research management offers a solution that can support both the individual researcher and the institution. So let's just talk about research management for a bit. This is a global profession, and it arose from the need of researchers and institutions to tap into diverse sources of funding. This is a global phenomenon. And this profession has been in existence for a long time in countries such as the US and the UK. And this involves offering support to researchers and to institutions with areas such as increased awareness of funding opportunities. How does one put a grant proposal together? How does one meet the funder and institutional norms? And how does one actually manage the entire project? It's a rather specialized set of practices that help the institution and the individuals optimize all of these opportunities. And it's currently a gap in the Indian research ecosystem. So again, let's look at that a little bit more detail. So on the left is a standard chart of what is called the funding life cycle. Typically that has a pre-award component and a post-award component. The pre-award component is typically where the PI is looking for the right kind of funding opportunity to apply to, putting the proposal together, maybe with ideas from collaborators, with input from mentors, constructing the budget, the application package, and all the way up to submission. The post-award part of the cycle kicks in, obviously, once the grant is actually awarded. And this would entail the PI working with their team, with the administration, to ensure that the project is on track and also that the funds are spent as has been agreed with the funding agency. So if we look at the kind of research management support that's available across the world in different institutions, let's look at some of the areas where this kind of support might be helpful. So centralized services for partnership building. So how does one build an international partnership? Is there some assistance available for that from the institution, or academia industry partnerships? Again, is there some way that the institution can facilitate this? There's the pre-award support. So there are actually offices that really help PIs with all of these activities in the pre-award domain. Post-award grant management, that is taking a broader view, ensuring that all the reporting is on track, that the expenditure is on track. Program management, so I refer to team science, which are these large programs which bring lots of people together, typically extremely large grants. They need dedicated project management or program management. The ethics secretariat, which enables all of the decisions and the working of the institutional review committees, the ethics review committees, and also research output and research information management in certain countries. So the point to note is that these are all different aspects of research management, and institutions worldwide usually configure these activities depending on their own research strategy and what is most effective, what they feel is the best kind of support for their researchers. And if you look around the world, you'll find this office is known by various kinds of names. It could be called a research development office, the Office of Sponsored Research, the Sponsored Research and Industry Collaborations Office, and so on and so forth. But the point is that within all of these offices, there is a centralized service that is supporting both the PIs and the institution. And what this kind of a centralized service does require are skilled staff. Staff who understand the research process, staff who understand the nuances of all of these different activities, and who can work across different stakeholders to facilitate these steps. And so it's this group of skilled staff that India does need to build up. And this is what led to the genesis of the IRMI initiative, the India Research Management Initiative. So I'll take a few minutes to talk through the India Research Management Initiative, the genesis, and where we've got to so far. So IRMI is an initiative of the DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance. The India Alliance is an independent, dynamic public charity that funds research in health and biomedical sciences in India. And the India Alliance has a footprint, having supported grants all across the country, and typically very large, long-term, flexible grants. And the India Alliance also invests in transformative ideas and supportive research ecosystems. So this is the mandate of the India Alliance, and IRMI arose as an initiative of the India Alliance. So let me talk you through some of the early steps. So it actually goes way back to 2016, which is at least 5 years ago. And there was actually a scoping study commissioned by Wellcome Trust. There were a group of consultants who came from London to India. There was a workshop in Delhi. There were also site visits to different institutions. And that was the starting conversation for the status of research management in India. And in May 2017, the India Alliance organized a panel discussion on research offices for Indian institutions. And these early conversations finally led to the launch of a 12-month IRMI pilot in February 2018. So for the pilot phase, we actually worked with 31 institutions across the country. These institutions were selected in consultation with the India Alliance. They included institutions funded by different government departments, also private institutions, medical units, and others. So what we also did was curate what we called the sharing sessions. These are small group workshops that allowed us to get together with research leaders and research managers. And we did 3 of these sessions across India, in Pune, in Delhi, and in Bangalore. And these discussions helped to shape a picture from the leadership view, from the research manager view, of what the situation was like at different institutions. And the IRMI pilot phase also was the beginning of us connecting the dots with respect to the research managers. So the sharing sessions also provided opportunities for the few research managers we knew at the time to come together to share their experiences, to share their concerns. And just being together as part of a community was hugely a boost to the research managers who felt validated about their roles at their institutions. So the key need emerging from this IRMI pilot phase was that the research manager pool needed to be developed in India, and that the existing research managers needed support with their training, with their own professional development, and being part of a community. In parallel, we realized that this would require the creation of jobs with long-term prospects in the country. And so I'd like to share a few findings from the pilot phase. What we realized was that financial management support for grants was available at all the institutions that we interacted with. Whereas the pre-award part that I mentioned, which is from the identification of funding opportunity all the way up to submission, only a small number of institutions at that stage were providing support at the pre-award stages. And we also realized something interesting, which was that several of India's research managers who were at institutions had originally worked at funding agencies, including the India Alliance, and had then moved to new roles at research institutions. And this trend has continued. So our learnings from the IRMI pilot, we wrote it up as an open letter, and this was a very important step for us. And based on these findings, based on these learnings, the India Alliance constructed the current phase of the IRMI initiative. It's a 5-year phase aimed at strengthening research ecosystems in India. So there are 4 strategic priorities for IRMI: supporting research centers who want to develop their research management services, supporting training, career development, and networking needs for our research managers, building national and international partnerships for knowledge and resource exchange, and finally, creating a community of practice, because it's really not nice to be working in isolation. For any group of professionals, it's really crucial to be part of a community where one can share experiences and best practice and just learn from each other and be each other's support. So today, IRMI is being implemented via a combination of some flagship funding programs and a set of community activities. And let me just talk you through that. So there are actually 3 different funding opportunities through the IRMI initiative. There are the RM fellowships. These are 3-year fellowships, and the purpose of the fellowships is to help institutions who are at a very early stage of building their research office, and a research office that offers comprehensive support throughout the life cycle of the grant. So that's the pre-award and the post-award stages. So these are 3-year fellowships. The institution is expected to nominate a fellow who will then take responsibility for developing those activities. Next off are the RM grants, the research management grants. These are 1-year grants. These are for institutions which already have an existing research office, but who want to add some portfolios to it, who want to augment their existing services. And finally, there are the RM travel grants, because we realized that it would be wonderful for India's research managers to be able to travel to international conferences in the field, to network with colleagues from Europe and Japan and Singapore and other countries, and just to develop their own ideas for how research management is conducted in other countries and what learnings they could bring back to their own institution. So these are the 3 IRMI funding opportunities available through the India Alliance. And as I said, in parallel, we're also building a community of practitioners. So last year, of course, with the pandemic, since we couldn't organize in-person workshops, we took to the virtual medium. We actually organized a webinar series last year. This was wonderful because it was a monthly webinar series. It gave our research managers a nice focus, an opportunity to get together. And we got to hear a variety of speakers, both from India and overseas, also from institutions and funding agencies. So hearing all these diverse points of view. So the webinar series also served to raise awareness about research management in India. What are the different functions? What are the different kinds of roles? And video recordings of these webinar series are now available on the India Alliance YouTube channel in case anybody would like to take a look. And we are continuing with that. So even through this year, we will be organizing various webinars and workshops around the theme of building capacity within grants offices, the different kinds of roles within research management. And these webinars and workshops will be open to anyone who has an interest in research management and who wants to become part of the community. I'd just like to say that during the IRMI pilot phase, there was a small group of us, actually 7 of us, who had this amazing opportunity to travel to Edinburgh. We went to attend INORMS 2018. INORMS is the largest congress of research managers in the world. There were 7 of us from India amidst 1,100 colleagues from the rest of the world, who were all doing various aspects of research management in their day-to-day roles, whether that was pre-award or research impact or post-award management. So that was an incredible experience. It was a bit overwhelming to be part of such a large gathering, but this really gave us the impetus to say, no, we need a community of our own in India. So this is something we'd like to work towards. And it also gave us the encouragement to actually put together a conference for India. So we attended INORMS in 2018, and in 2021, after a gap of about 3 years, we finally we curated India's first research management conference. This was a virtual conference, and we had colleagues joining in from all across the country. And we also had our friends and collaborators from overseas joining in. This was an amazing experience, and we would very much like to continue on that. So we're planning the next conference, IRMI Annual Conference in 2022. It's being planned for October 2022, and more details about the conference will be released through the India Alliance communication channels. But this is my request to the policy fellows attending today, that I think it's really important for policy and practice to engage. So please do, take the time to join the IRMI webinars and workshops, be part of the IRMI community, and certainly think about presenting some of your findings at the IRMI annual conference. We'd love to see you there. So that's, and one final point is, of course, that we are building the IRMI network, and it'd be lovely to have research managers from all across India participate in the conversation. So there are two ways of joining the network. There is a LinkedIn page, and do subscribe if that's of interest to you. There is also an individual registration form on the IRMI website. And that registration form, if you can complete it and submit it, then that allows us to put you on a mailing list. And so any activities that are for the network members, you'll get access to all of that information. So that was about IRMI. And now I'd just like to bring my talk to a close with picking up a few points which may be of interest to the policy fellows. So that section of the STIP 2020 refers to the ease of doing research and to technology solutions for management of different aspects of research. So at the IRMI annual conference, we actually invited some colleagues from a company called Sthira IT Solutions. They've been working in India for nearly a decade, developing grant management software. And this has been rolled out across several institutions in the country. And they were there at the conference to share their learnings of how they approached building these solutions and what their experiences with different kinds of organizations were. So it's very heartening to see these kind of developments in India. And I'd also like to bring in a slightly different aspect, which is of PhD programs. So in India, we have the PhD students in the Indian research ecosystem play a really important role. They are the pillars of research in India. And managing the activities of PhD students from an institutional perspective has certain challenges. And this is again an area where technology solutions can play a role. So I was part of a national summit. It was a very nice set of workshops where we looked at PhD programs in the Indian research ecosystem and what role technology solutions could play in the management of PhD programs. So I think these are very welcome developments. It's nice to see efforts like this happening. And I think we have a lot to learn both from our own experiences and possibly from similar experiences in other parts of the world about what it takes to build technology solutions that can empower institutions to manage all of their research programs effectively, increase the transparency and make it much more streamlined and less reliant on manual steps. Another point I'd like to bring in is about overheads. So globally, it's an accepted practice that there is usually a grants office at the institution that helps the PIs and the institution in raising extramural funds. And so therefore, when the overheads are available for the institution, a proportion of the overheads are usually channeled back into the research office. So as part of the IRMI 2020 webinar series, we actually had a webinar focused exclusively on this topic. And we had some colleagues from Stellenbosch and other organizations in Africa who shared their experiences. And again, the video for this wonderful webinar is available on the India Alliance YouTube channel. But this is the kind of activity which is going to need some work in India, both at the policy level and at the implementation level, making the connection between the value addition that a research office can bring and to the resources being put back into the office. So something to think about, maybe from a policy perspective. Gender is always an issue, and this is true for research management as well. Although here there is a reverse bias, research management has a definite female bias, and this is both our experience in India and this is a global phenomenon as well. So maybe this merits some kind of evidence-based investigation as to What does this tell us about the profession? And maybe what does this tell us about academia? Because we do have a lot of women leaving academia to take up roles in research management. So maybe this is food for thought. And the final point I'd like to raise is about the professionalization of research management in India. So there's an excellent talk at the IRMI conference by a colleague, Dr. Madhuri Datta. And at this point, a key problem for research managers in India is the lack of a career track at organizations. It is currently still the appointment of research managers tends to be on fixed term contracts. And whereas the research office really is a long-term resource for an institution. So it would be best if the career tracks of research managers could be formalized. And Madhuri at her presentation made a very nice comparison with parallel career tracks for research managers at organizations such as DBT and ICMR, and whether we could have similar career tracks for research managers working at the institutions. The other points that came up for discussion included having certification courses for training research managers in India at different levels and creating standards for the different research management roles. So again, this is quite a significant piece of work, and hopefully through the IRMI initiative, we'll make a start with this. But certainly, this is an important priority for India, which is the professionalization of research management. So on that note, I'll bring my talk to an end, and I'd be very happy to take questions from the audience. Just have a few thank yous to say. There are a lot of people who have impacted my thinking and my career, both mentors and colleagues. A couple of individuals, Dr. Shahid Jamil, former CEO of the India Alliance, and Dr. Simon Kay, formerly at the Wellcome Trust, played a very crucial part in helping the IRMI initiative to get off to an excellent start. And now that has been continued extremely well by Dr. Vasan Sambandamurthy, the current CEO, and Mr. Vishi Rao, the current CEO of the India Alliance. I'd also like to thank Dr. Simon Kerridge, the former Director of Research Services at Kent in the UK. Simon has been a wonderful mentor and has been very helpful for us to have discussions with him about research management in the global context and what might work in India. And of course, a huge thanks to all the staff at the India Alliance for all of their committed work with the IRMI initiative, and members of the Indian and global research and research management community. So thank you very much for your attention, and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayyar. That was thank you so much for so nicely and comprehensively covering different aspects of research management in India, like highlighting its importance and different issues that are there with international partnerships, like different roles that research managers have. I think a lot of those things are not a lot of people know those things, especially when they are going through their own facilitating the ease of doing research in India, which is a very important topic for the STEP as well. So thank you very much. I also would like to say, like, it's also a great learning for me personally, because I'm managing this program. I got to know that there are many such initiatives by IRMI that I can also take part in. So thanks for that as well. I open the floor now for questions. If someone has a question, please raise your hand and turn on your camera and mic and ask your question. Maybe I would start with one, since we have all the policy fellows here. Maybe you could highlight if there are some opportunities for research funding in policy, science, tech, innovation, policy related areas that you might be aware about, or kind of path fellows can take in future to, if not directly involved with the research management, but still indirectly support different activities related to research management in India. That would be great.
Sure. I think there would be a lot of opportunities for the policy fellows to converge. I think there are a lot of questions that will emerge, and the best way would be for us to keep in touch and sort of see what might be of interest to both sides, what synergies appear, and we can then look for funding opportunities accordingly as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ayyar. Next, we have a question from Professor Abhi. Yes, Abhi, please go ahead.
Yeah. So very nice talk. It was very nice for us to listen to you about the profession of research management at various institutions. Our own institute now has an Office of Research Grants, ORG as it is called. And it was set up only recently, about a year ago. And we have been receiving information about various grant calls and so on every once in a while. And there is also a newsletter that they produce. But before that, I mean, we just had a unit whose primary responsibility was to take care of the financial aspects of the research grants. What you call the post-award part of it is the one that they helped us with, or not helped us with. But anyway, that is what we are doing here, and I just hope that it will grow in size as well as in scope of the kind of help that they provide. Yeah. And it was also very interesting for me to listen to you about the IRMI initiative, which seems pretty interesting. So it brings together the entire community of research management professionals and so on. All this is very new to me, and it's great to hear about these things. So my question is, does IRMI work with the funding agencies as well, and sort of give them advice on shaping their research grant calls, or even producing better ways of or implementing better ways of running their grant programs and things like that, or yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So very quickly about the IRC Office of Research Grants. Yes, I mean, they're part of the IRMI network, and we've interacted over various platforms. So it's very nice to see that taking shape. And there is, so the pre-award and the post-award, there are various ways of working together. And I think each institution tries to find that appropriate balance. Now, with respect to IRMI working with funding agencies, I mean, in the long run, that's certainly something that would be amazing to do. So, for example, if you look at the UK, and the equivalent body for research managers in the UK is called IRMA. So IRMA have various touch points with UKRI and the major funding agencies within the UK. There are projects that they take on together. There are different ways in which they engage. So it would be wonderful in due course if IRMI also were to grow into a body that would be able to work across with funders. So for now, what we'd like is for the funders to be at the table and to participate in the discussions about research management, because this is a shift in culture from having research managers just at the funding agencies to actually taking them to the institutions as well, because it's recognizing that the institutions also need that kind of professional help. And then, of course, it's about the convergence. It's about seeing how we can work effectively together. But the hope is also that in having a national program like that, there is a collective voice which is more effective than individual voices trying to connect or to influence. That is the aspiration, and we'll see how this goes. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Ayyar. Thanks, Abhi. I would just like to highlight, maybe for all fellows, yes, as Abhi mentioned, we have Office of Research Grant. Please check out its website. They have really many opportunities, not so many in science policy areas, but still, as a science policy professional, it would be interesting maybe for you to see how that information is provided and how it is arranged and so on. We also have an Office of International Relations at IISc. This is another thing that might be of interest for fellows to check out.
I have a point to add to that, Suresh, which is that maybe the policy fellows can engage with the Office of Research Grants and explain their kind of research interests and, seek their support with finding the right kind of funding opportunities. Because it's always through dialogue, and it's good for the office also to build up that knowledge base. So going beyond just science and technology, but then, if there's a program about science policy, then how does one support that as well? So maybe a bit of dialogue over there would be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I would encourage everyone to engage with them. I also had a kind of interaction with them, and they forwarded me like an Excel sheet that has list of science policy related things which I had forwarded to the fellows earlier. Yeah, maybe fellows can go back to that again as well. Next question is from Radhika. Yes, Radhika, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Suresh. Thank you so much, Dr. Savita, for taking us through IRMI initiative and relevance of research management. It's very heartening to see that loads of alternative careers are coming up in field of science other than the traditional career.
I cannot hear Radhika. Is it just me?
No, I lost signal.
Yeah, we can't hear anything at all from Radhika. Maybe
Okay.
Question.
Am I audible? My network went for a while.
Yes, Radhika. Now we can see.
Apologies for this. So I directly jump to my question. So my first, I have two quick questions. If time permit, you can answer both, or we can go with the first one then. I'll just speak up my questions. The first one is that how research management units and offices, they can help to build an industry academia framework for universities. Like we see good framework are already existing for top institutes like IIC and IITs, but for our central and state universities, such framework is not there. Such offices are also not there. So how research management can help in that? If you can share some case study or experience where IRMI has directly benefited or have gone through that thing, it would be very helpful. And the second quick questions, how you see research management can link scientific fraternity with the policymakers to communicate what are their research needs, challenges, and what solutions they are seeking. So, like, can research management be act as a channel for linking scientists and policymakers? Yeah, over to you, Dr.
Thank you so much. So yes, it's. I think both are excellent questions. So the academia industry partnerships, for sure, that needs facilitation. So through the IRMI initiative, I mean, that's not something we're focusing on just yet. But, for example, we have seen the way the IITs do this. They have a dedicated office. And the crucial thing to note is that all of these efforts take time to nurture. So there is a leadership interest that is needed. First of all, the steer has to come from the leadership. And then you need an office set up accordingly and be in tune with what the researchers want to explore and also with opportunities that might be there in the world, in the industrial sector. So, and this also requires a lot of negotiation. So it is an entire sort of piece of work. And any institution that wants to develop this, my suggestion would be that maybe they take advice from other institutions that have done this successfully, like the IITs or the IIC, and learn from that. So, maybe through the IRMI initiative, we might be able to have some conversations around it and some examples of best practice shared, but that's in future. And your second question about connecting the dots. So policy, researchers, research management. I mean, I think policy and researchers can connect directly. They don't need intermediaries. But certainly, I think what would be really good is to have conversations that include all of these different voices. So we hope that the next conference will provide that kind of a platform where we can have specific topics and look at it through different angles. So this, I mean, therefore, I mean, do watch out for news about the conference and see whether you can participate. We'd love to have you there.
Thanks,
Right.
Dr. Ayyar. Okay. So next we have a question from Nimita, but before that I would also like to encourage the fellows from the batch that has just joined, the fifth cohort, to also ask questions. They have not asked any yet. So over to you, Nimita, for your question.
Thank you, Suresh. And I feel like as if there is a discrimination for us. We are equally ignorant no matter whichever batch we are. So thank you so much, Dr. Ayyar, for elucidating on different aspects, the challenges and issues of being a research management, personnel, or how do you manage research grants or different aspects of research management. My question is something which I worked on, and also I think when we met long back, also we had a long chat on that about when we look at we talk about international partnerships, we talk about global partnership, different funding agencies, be it Wellcome Trust or Melinda Gates Foundations, and the list goes on and on. Now, how do you, as a research manager, how do you see the point of difference and the point of parities across Indian funding agencies and international funding agencies in terms of their interest, their interest could be research oriented interest, or it could be interest that they want to just partner with an Indian agency. It's like, how do you do that, and what sort of challenges as a research manager you have been witnessing in your career? Or I'm sure the job of a research manager is a tough one, which looks like it's not as clean as it comes on the presentation. So and
So see bits in between.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, how do you see this contrast between both of them, and how do you address this challenge? Should we look more for Indian partners? Should we look more for global partners? Where do we kind of bring certain kinds of reconciliation? Where do we build a consensus, if at all we have to? So
Sure.
over to you on this. Yeah.
Thank you, Nimita. So the first thing I would like to say is that each funding agency is set up with a specific mandate. So, it is structured in a particular way that allows the expenditure, the priorities to be set in a particular manner. And actually, every agency then also goes through a periodic review of their priorities, what they want to fund, and then it moves to the stage of what is the instrument that they use for the funding. So first is the overall mandate of the organization. Second is the kinds of research areas, or well, let's not call it research areas, interest areas, focus areas. And then comes the level of the instrument. So, for foreign funding agencies, I think there is a lot of interest in supporting good research from India, because there would be interest in supporting good research from anywhere in the world. So actually, that again is a fundamental, right? But here now the instruments become very important, because any kind of funding requires a transaction of money against certain deliverables, and also that funding transaction then has to comply with national regulations and with international regulations. This is a fundamental, whichever organization you're working with. So even if it's the most flexible foundation, they can only have expenditure in alignment with their mandate, right? So this is, I think, the fundamental thing. And then you're talking about partnerships. So partnerships, again, so different categories. So of course there are local partnerships, there are international partnerships, and it can be extremely challenging to work with a new funder system, one that you're not familiar with. So this is where the role of the research manager is one of dialogue. So we've had many situations where the PIs wanted to apply to something that we were not familiar with. So there were a lot of phone calls, Skype calls, Zoom calls, emails, and really persistence in trying to get the right answers for the PI and with the institution. So again, that connect is really important. What does the PI want to do, and is that okay with the institution? So, for example, if the PI, I'll just take an example here of research funded by tobacco companies. Certain funding agencies have an issue with this, and there's a categorical statement that because of our values, our principles, we will not support researchers who are receiving funding from a tobacco company. So now from the researcher's point of view, well, what do they want to do? And from the institution's point of view, oh, what do we want to do? So the research manager's job then becomes one of being this glue between all these different stakeholders and trying to progress the conversation. And sometimes it works out because you're able to find a solution that is acceptable to all the parties. Sometimes it doesn't work out. And similarly, I mean, so the previous question about academia industry partnerships. Again, partnerships by definition are between organizations or individuals who are coming from very different points of view. And so therefore, the negotiation of a particular partnership may not ultimately be acceptable to the institution. Maybe the institution can't sign on the terms and conditions for the partnership. So this, I think, is the real challenge for the research manager, which is to be open to listen to the points of view of all of the different parties and to then try and find a solution that works, or to help the individual and the institution arrive at the conclusion that we can't do this. But I think it's a fact that although the goal is to try and maximize the funding opportunities and to see to the best extent possible how can one work with these different funder systems, there are points which are boundaries where the institution can't sign up. So, but to have that conversation in a professional manner across all the stakeholders, and that I think is the key contribution of the research manager. I hope this answers your question somewhat.
Yes, it does. That there is a mix of hard and soft institutions that works together in order to manage this. And of course, it would vary case by case. So, I mean, we can continue discussing about, because I was reading something where it just clicked me, and then maybe we can talk through emails or something.
Sure, absolutely.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Ayyar, and thanks, Savita, for your question also. Now we have another hand raise. This is from Dr. Momita Kole from our center. Over to you, Momita. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Julius, and thanks, Dr. Ayyar, for such a wonderful lecture. So my question actually is that internationally, we right now see there are a lot of conversation going on around research data management. But in India, we don't see that yet. But like there are W core metadata or such kind of RBM practice that has been prescribed. So how do we make that in Indian context? Because I think that none of our institution, even the policies, yet to address this. But if someone wants to apply for an international funding, they would have to address this, that they need to develop a research data management program even before they apply for the funds. So what do you see there? How do we build a conversation, or do we even have a professional for it? Because, for example, again, I'm just stretching a little bit my question. There are data steward and all this concept coming up. So what is all this thing in India? Where do we see ourselves, or what are this?
I think that's a really, really important point. In fact, just yesterday I was in a conversation about the data management plan for international partnerships. Yes, I mean, many organizations actually require the PI to submit a data management plan as part of their funding proposal. So now here's where what I'd like to say, two things. One is that any research office, it has to be a long-term activity for the institution, because it's about building that knowledge about how to deal with these kind of things, about, there is always going to be something for which there is no precedent. And so then, just as I told Nimita, it's about having the right conversations. It's about saying that, well, okay, in this particular case, we need to submit this data management plan. We don't have a policy for it. So how do we deal with this situation? So as a research manager in my career, I have been in situations where I've scrambled around on both fronts, kind of telling the institution that we need a policy for this aspect. And secondly, trying to help the researcher with meeting the deadline for the funding application. So the ideal world is where you learn from that interaction, you learn from that particular iteration that, okay, fine, this was what was required for this agency. This is how we approach the data management plan at that submission point. So if something like that comes up again, you have that older example to go back to. So that is one contribution that a research office makes, is to build that institutional memory. The second is your question about where do we stand with respect to data. Again, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So with the IRMI initiative, for the 3 flagship programs, definitely for the RM fellowships and the RM grants, we're focusing on the core sort of pre-award and post-award part of the funding life cycle. But through the community initiatives, through the conference, we want to open up the conversation to other aspects of the research ecosystem which need to be developed. And if you look at, data research information management in the UK, for example, that's very well developed. And at certain institutions, you might find that's part of a research office or working very closely with the research office. So those are the kinds of connections we are yet to make. But I think it's good to recognize that this needs work.
Yeah, and actually, if I may point out, if you go to the Australian government site, and there they have probably the best management on this research data part. They really have a very good RDM, and where because in our case, what we see is that we don't even have the infrastructure. So for the management, you have to submit your research data as when you disseminate. And we don't even have that infrastructure. We probably would have to do it in Zenodo or something like that. So we are still lacking. So probably conversation on this would also be interesting, or
Yes.
at least some avenues for it would also be helpful, I feel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for raising that.
Yeah, thanks, Momita, and thanks again, Dr. Ayyar. Next, we have a question from Mahua. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, Dr. Ayyar. It was an amazing session, and thank you, Suresh, for arranging this for us, because this is something very particularly for me. I'm working with non-for-profit sectors in health. I have heard about research management internationally often. I see them, research managers, working very proactively in their organizations, but I wasn't aware that this profession as such is such strongly represented in India as well. So thank you so much for that. From you, I would like to know what is the scenario and scope of research managers in not-for-profit sector in India?
I think wherever there is funding required from diverse sources, one can take the approach that it is important to have a system in place for managing that effectively. So there is the pre-award part and the post-award part. The post-award part tends to be well developed, more developed than the pre-award part. Pre-award is also dictated by the ambitions of the individuals who are applying for that funding. So I think there is scope for research management in any organization that is involved in this act of raising funding and managing funding from diverse sources. The details will change. So in fact, this is true of all organizations. So if you look at, for example, an institution that's focused on immunology research, then the researchers there will be possibly applying for funding from a certain spectrum of funding agencies or sources. And so the research office would be geared up towards that. Whereas if it's a university which has natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, that's a very different spread of disciplines. And so therefore the research office would need to cater to that. And I think a similar kind of extrapolation would apply to the not-for-profits, which is what are the sources of funding that the not-for-profits want to work with? And therefore, you would need somebody with a skill base to work with those kind of potential sources and to facilitate as is needed.
Yeah, thank you. And just a small follow-up question, you being in this profession for quite so long, where do you see is the maybe opportunity or scope for researcher acting as a research manager and also carrying out their own research? How much clash of time and everything, what is the scope there?
Yeah. So a lot of places one sees this. So I mean, so the UK, the US, EU are far, far more mature systems in this regard. But if you look at South Asian countries, if you look at possibly Singapore and Japan, you will find examples. Africa, you will find examples where researchers are taking on research management roles. And it's perhaps not the best thing. Now, the advantage of that is that the researcher understands the challenges, knows the research process, and therefore can be an extremely effective facilitator. But then on the other hand, the research management itself is a full-on job. Of course, it depends on the workload, but I think this researcher might find themselves really stretched with having to ensure that these administrative tasks are completed and they still have room to carry out their research. So it's probably not an optimal thing. But what we are seeing are individuals who are trained as researchers, who've done their PhDs, who are taking up research management roles. And again, there's a question about it. Why is that kind of a transition happening? And one answer for that, certainly for a country like India, where it's all very new, is because the research managers have to work with researchers and they have to have a certain credibility with which to have the conversations. So somebody who's done a PhD, somebody who's been through that research process, maybe they might have more confidence and more of that background connect with which to work with the researcher. But if you look at more mature systems, then they move away from that. So there, it's far more, driven by process because the processes are in place. Whereas in a country like India, we are still setting processes. So we do find a lot of researchers who are moving into research management, but carrying out both roles together is probably extremely challenging.
Thank you so much for your insight.
Thanks, Dr. Ayyar, and thanks, Mama, for your question as well. We have a hand raise from Professor Abhinandan. Yes, Abhi, please go ahead.
Yeah, so this is about the practices adopted in research management offices elsewhere. And this is about whether their constituency would also include students, doctoral students and postdoctoral fellows and so on. Or is it usually seen as the domain of a student affairs office?
So I think this is an institutional decision how to divide up these different administrative portfolios. If you think about it, then managing the activities of an academic office, that's also research support. That certainly is research support. But how that is configured, whether that's part of the research office or a separate office, this is really very much up to the institution. So I know institutions who've done both. It's a similar situation with the ethics secretariat. There are certain institutions which have separate research office and separate ethics secretariat, certain institutions where both the functions are within the same team, but assigned to different individuals. So it really depends on the structure of the institution and the size and, the scale of activities.
I guess it would also mean that going forward, I mean, in India also, since it's a very young field, I mean, eventually it will grow to a stage where other constituencies could also be included in their portfolio of activities. Okay.
Certainly, yeah. So the thing to remember is also that you want the research office to be nimble, to have close links with the researchers, so that especially when there's a deadline looming large, then that tends to be the key focus of getting the papers out. Once you start adding more functions to the research office, then you need a hierarchy within the research office. So those are things that the institution, decisions that the institution needs to take. So how do you structure that team? How are their activities going to be managed? Who's going to supervise which bits? So putting that plan in place. Hence, this is very much a collaboration between the leadership and between the office that's, building these services.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Ayyar. Next question is from Chagun. What do you, Chagun? Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Suresh. Thanks, Savita. That was excellent listening to you and also the conversation. We have had these conversations before. I just like to, for the benefit of larger audience here, how do you think the research management offices and practices can influence the institutional policies, particularly, let's say, institutional research policies? We have seen this happening in NCBS's case or ISER Pune's case, but not in many institutions. I would go further to say even in ISC to an extent. From your experiences, how would you say that trajectory looks like and what needs to be done if some policy level influencing has to be done?
Yeah. So absolutely, Chagun. So this is from my own experience. I was very proactive in working with the management, going back to them and sort of saying that this is what we've encountered, this is what the funding agency needs, this is a policy that we don't have in place yet. And then looking at examples from across the world, whether that's Stanford or Cambridge or wherever, and trying to create the policies that would be suitable for our institution. And certainly, I think research managers need to have that confidence and that working relationship with the management team, if not to draft the policy, but to at least highlight that these are gaps that we need to fill. We've dealt with something as a one-off, but for future, this should be a policy. So that really requires a very, very good working relationship between the research management office and the leadership team. That's at the sort of, the crux of it, really.
I'm just going to take advantage of this time and there is no hands up, just to pick from what you just said. The relationship also comes with some dynamics that are played around various professionals in an institution, be it academic or fully research institution. I know the situation is changing in terms of seeing non-faculty members also as equal members of scientific enterprise. But from the recommendations that you have from the research managers conference, could you highlight a few which can be like top 2 or 3 priority recommendations to make sure that the research management professionals can also be treated on par with faculty members so that their voices are heard and that good relationship is built to make that policy change?
Absolutely, Jagan. I think this is really important. And so here, I think it's very important also to define the role of the research manager. If the research manager is a flexible administrator who's doing absolutely everything, that's not going to be very helpful. So you don't want it to be too rigid, but at the same time, if there is clarity on what the role of the research manager is. So first of all, it's between that research manager and the leadership team. Are they both comfortable with that definition? And the second thing is the endorsement from the research leadership team. This endorsement going across to their own community that here is a resource who's going to help you with the following activities. These activities are important to the institution, and so their contribution is important as well. But at the end of the day, also recognizing that this is a service which is subject to standards and subject to feedback from the community. So one way of doing that is to regularly be in touch with the community and take their feedback of, how did this make a difference to you? So that could be an ongoing process. But I've also heard other excellent examples from other institutions across the world where they do a periodic review. So maybe once in 5 years, maybe once in 10 years, where it's a detailed look at the services, at the people, and the kind of engagement that they have with the community. Are there any concerns? Does there need to be any kind of reconstruction of the service? So in fact, if you look in the West, there are organizations that will help institutions carry out this kind of review and make recommendations that maybe these are the kinds of changes you might need to make. So yeah, I've come across examples where this kind of review then led to a restructuring of the research services with the idea that finally that made the relationship with the community more effective. It happens because any service drifts with time. And the service is set up, with a certain premise, with certain players, but the people can change. The funding landscape can change. There could be other changes like the pandemic. So the pressures that people are operating under can change. And so therefore, it's extremely useful to do a periodic audit of the services and whether they meet expectations or not, and to take necessary action from there. But if this can be done, and if the leadership team continue to endorse the value addition being made by the office, then that can go a long way in ensuring that research managers are treated well, that they're respected for what they bring to the table, that they may not be researchers, they are not researchers anymore, but they are making a value addition to the system. So that recognition will happen.
Thanks so much, Savita.
Thanks, Dr. Ayyar. Thanks, Shagun. Maybe I'll also use this opportunity to ask another question, if it's okay with Dr. Ayyar. So my question is, looking from the research management perspective, how do you see the upcoming National Research Foundation structure that is coming up? What do you think are things that should be done to make it a very successful endeavor in making life easy for scientists, but also like increasing the overall research output of the country?
Yeah.
What would be your suggestions and recommendations on that side?
Suresh, to be quite honest, it's a space I'm watching. So I don't have any views to share on this just yet, but maybe a few things I'd like to say are that, the universities certainly need to be helped to successfully compete for funding and to manage funding. And so, we do need to think about research management structures at different kinds of institutions, not just a group of institutions. And the NRF promises, I think, large changes. So I'm waiting and watching. Maybe connect on this subject, in future, and we'll have a discussion.
maybe in the next orientation program, we might have a more detailed discussion on this once it is operational. So thank you very much, Dr. Ayyar. I do not see any more questions. So I would again like to thank you for your insights and your time. It has been a great learning experience for all of us and eye-opening in many regards. Like many of these things, many of us have not been familiar with. And also, thank you for all the policy pointers, like the things that you have pointed out. I think those are very, very important things, and some of them need a very serious consideration in the STEP process as well. So, thank you very much, Dr. Ayyar. It has been a real pleasure. I really hope. I also wish fellows to reach out to you, if that's okay with you, and get more guidance.
Absolutely. Look forward to being in touch and invite all of you to join the IRMI network if that interests you. There's also a LinkedIn page. You can follow the post from the LinkedIn page, or you can be part of the mailing list. Definitely look forward to keeping in touch. And I wish you all the very best, especially to the new batch. Hope you all go ahead and pick really interesting problems and make a difference.
Thanks, Dr. Ayyar. We can now end this meeting. We look forward to keep on engaging with you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all of you for your time. I will also share the recording on YouTube link once it is ready. With all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Bye-bye then.
Thanks
Bye,
a lot.
everyone.
Bye.
Wishing everyone a nice evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.